Hi Summate, welcome back to my channel. It's Needles by Tiara here. In today's tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to draft and cut a perfect short pencil skirt as displayed on the thumbnail. So for all of your required measurements, I am going to be leaving all of that on the description box down below. So with me here, I have my pattern paper well laid out. Please ensure that your pattern paper is on fold. However, mine isn't on fold, but once I transfer this into my fashion fabric, I would most definitely ensure that that point is on fold. So with that being done, let's dive right into it. So before we proceed on, we're going to be doing some mathematical calculations together. So for your required measurements, you're going to be needing your client's waist circumference, you're going to be needing your client's hip circumference, and you're going to be needing your client's waist to hip circumference, which happens to be your point measurement, and lastly your client's waist to full skirt length measurement, which is this. So these are all the basic measurements that you're going to be needing for the drafting of this perfect pencil short skirt. So like I said earlier on, we're going to be doing some mathematical calculations together. So please, I need you to pay very much keen attention at this point. So when you're making your client's skirt, remember you're supposed to divide your client's hip circumference by 4, right? Now in this case, you're not going to be dividing it by 4, rather you're going to be dividing that measurement by 2. So let's dive right into the calculation. So like I said earlier on, in this case, my client's hip circumference is 47 inches. Normally, I am supposed to divide that measurement by 4, but in this case, I am not going to be doing that. Rather, I am going to be dividing that measurement by 2. So my client's hip circumference in this case equals 47 inches. So whatever yours is, go ahead to chalk it down. Now, like I said earlier on, I am going to divide that value by 2. So let's go ahead to do the calculations together. 47 inches being my hip circumference divided by 2 equals 23.5 inches, right? So 23.5 inches happens to be half the measurement for both my front pattern and my back pattern. So 23.5 inches is for my front pattern and 23.5 inches is for my back pattern as well. So go ahead to chalk it down. So with this, it automatically means that half of my client's hip circumference for my front pattern equals 23.5 inches and half of my client's hip circumference for my back pattern equals 23.5 inches as well. So we got this value by dividing our hip circumference by 2. I hope you understand. So now for our front pattern, we're going to subtract 1 inch from that measurement. So by the time you subtract 1 inch from 23.5 inches, it will automatically leave you with the value of 22.5 inches. So it means that my client's front hip circumference equals 22.5 inches, while my client's half of my hip circumference for the back pattern equals 23.5 inches. I hope you understand. So this right here is the major reason why we had to divide our hip circumference by 2, so that we can subtract 1 inch from half of our client's front hip circumference. I hope you understand. So it means my client's front hip circumference, half of it currently is 23.5 inches minus that 1 inch which I took off, which left us with the value of 22.5 inches, while our back half of our back hip circumference still remains constant, which is 23.5 inches. I hope you understand. Don't worry, as we progress, you'd get to understand this better. The 1 inch that we took off from our front pattern is going to be encased into our back pattern. Like I said, as we progress, you definitely get to understand the reason for this. So here is my pattern paper well laid. So now at this point, we'd go ahead to chalk out or roll out our starting line, which is exactly what I'm doing at this point. Please go ahead to mark out your starting line at this point. So with that being done, please take note, your starting line is equally going to serve as your client's waist point line. So go ahead to place your tape from your starting line, which happens to be your client's waist point line. Now you're going to be chalking the distance between your client's waist to hip point line. So whatever the value of yours is, go ahead to chalk it down at this point. So do kindly take note, if you want to attach a band to the skate, a band that comes with the skate, you're supposed to place your tape from that starting line and subtract either 1.5 inches or 2 inches as the case may be before you go ahead to chalk down your hip point measurements and the rest of your point measurements. But in this case, I want to attach an high waistband. For that reason, that is the reason why I have not subtracted 1.5 inches or even 2 inches, which is supposed to be for the basic band measurement. So like I said, I won't be doing that. So now, having imputed the distance between my client's waist to hip point, now chalk down the distance between your client's waist to full skirt length, which is this. Having done that, place your tape on the full skirt length point and chalk down 2 inches, which is basically going to serve as your skirt folding allowance. So now, to get the consistency and the accuracy of a straight line, I am going to be taking that point measurement all the way down here, my waist to my hip point, my client's waist to knee point, and lastly the 2 inches for my skirt folding allowance. So with that being done, we'd go in with our straight ruler and would go ahead to connect all those points into each other to form our basic straight line. So with that being done, we'd move ahead to label our pattern. So this right here is our client's waist point, this is our hip point, and this is our full skirt length point, and lastly this is our skirt folding allowance point. So please take note of the basic point measurements, your waist point, hip point, full skirt length, and your allowance point. Now we'll move ahead to impute our circumference measurement. Now on your waist point, divide your client's waist circumference by 4 and chalk it down. Remember that all of your measurements start from the folded part of your pattern. I hope you understand. So having imputed our waist circumference divided by 4, now on our hip circumference, remember we did some calculations earlier on, which was currently our client's front hip circumference, half of it equals 23.5 inches, and we subtracted 1 inch from that measurement and we were left with the value of 22.5 inches. So it means our client's front hip circumference is 22.5 inches. So now at this point, we are going to further divide that measurement by 2. Remember, we had already divided that value by 2 and that was how we got 23.5 inches, which we subtracted 1, which gave us 22.5 inches. So on our hip circumference, we're going to divide that circumference by 2, which is 22.5 inches by 2, which mine equals 11.25. Now on my hip point, I would go ahead to impute that measurement, which is 11.25. Now for our full skirt length, you're going to subtract 1 inch from what you have at your hip circumference. So that would be 10.25. Remember, I had 11.25 for my hip circumference. Now I am going to be imputing 10.25 on my full skirt length. I hope you understand. So before we proceed on to go ahead to basically connect all the points, we're going to be imputing our basic darts. So for your dart, divide your client's nipple to nipple by 2 and chalk it down on your waist point line, which is exactly what I did at this point. Place your tape from your waist point line and come down by either 5 inches or 5.5 inches, which will serve as the length of your darts. Now go ahead to basically take that measurement, which is your nipple to nipple divided by 2, and impute it at that point. Going with your straight ruler, connect from your waist point down to the 5 inch or the 5.5 inches dart length that you had imputed at that point. Now we're going to be imputing our dart tightening. So your total dart tightening is 1 inch. So you're going to divide that 1 inch into 2. So like I said, your total dart tightening is 1 inch. Divide your 1 inch into 2 and we're left with the value of 0.5 inch. So on both sides of our dart, we're going to be imputing 0.5 inch. So at the center front, go ahead to chalk down 0.5 inch, and at the side front, go ahead to impute 0.5 inch as well. So we're going to go in with our straight ruler, connecting from that point down to our full dart length. So we'll go ahead to connect it all the way up this way. Having done that for our center front, now we'll go ahead to replicate that same process on our side fronts as well. So having done that, now we'd have to go ahead to replace the dart that we just imputed at this point. So remember, like I said, the total width of our dart at this point is 1 inch, which we've gone ahead to measure out. Now we're going to be replacing it on the sides. Remember, on our waist point, we divided our waist circumference by 4 and chalked it down at that point. Go ahead to measure out your dart and replace it on the sides this way. So having done that, now we'd go in with our ruler, connecting from our waist point down to our hip point and extensively down to our full skirt length point. Now, whatever measurement you have at your full skirt length point, please bring down that same measurement to your folding allowance point this way. With the reintroduction of our curve ruler, we're going to be connecting from our waist point down to our hip point, and with the head of our straight ruler, we're going to be extending it from the hip point down to the full skirt length point. So please pay attention to the way my slightly curved ruler is being placed at this point, and do go ahead to replicate same for yours. So now we're going with our straight ruler, connecting from our hip point down to our full skirt length point this way. So please just basically watch what I'm doing and go ahead to replicate same for yours. So go ahead to extend from that full skirt length down to your folding allowance point. Go ahead to smoothen out that point this way. Having done that, now on your waist point at the folded part of your pattern paper or your fabric, please come down at that point by 0.5 inch this way. Having done that, so the reason for this is basically to ensure that you have your skirt at that point coming out without some form of gaping or any folding at that point. Now place your tape and go up at that point by 0.5 inch as well. Now going with your curve ruler, go ahead to extend from that point all the way up to the 0.5 inch that you came up with at that point. So with that being done, now before we go ahead to make the connections, so I need you to pay attention. So if we go ahead to make the connection from that point down to that 0.5 inch, it would definitely shorten our dart. So we do not want that happening. So what we're going to do is you're going to take from one side leg of the dart, which is exactly what I'm folding at this point, and you'd go ahead to overlap it on the other side of the dart. So pick from one side of the dart, go ahead to overlap it on the other. Now go in with your masking tape and just as we were before, fold it on top of each other and go ahead to mask it down to keep it in place. With that being done, reintroduce your slightly curved ruler and you can now go ahead to connect it from the 0.5 inch at that point down to the 0.5 inch we have imputed at the folded part of our pattern paper. I hope you understand. So the reason why we did this is so that we will not have any shortage by the time we go ahead to take out the curve that we have imputed at that point. So with this being done, we're going to go ahead to take off our masking tape and we're going to be returning our pattern rather to how it was before. So this was the more reason why I said you shouldn't just make that connection. Rather, you should overlap your dart before you go ahead to make that connection. You do not want any shortage at all. So now I'll go in with my scissors and I'll go ahead to eliminate all the excesses that we have at every given point. So if you have watched this video to this point, what are you waiting for? Kindly hit on the subscription button, like and follow for more of this related content. Having eliminated the lower point, I would go ahead to eliminate my side excesses following the curves of my skirt all the way up this way. Having done that, so as we were before, now we'd go ahead to overlap that on each other before we go ahead to cut it to be on a safer side. But if you wish, you can still go ahead to follow out the drawn out curve and go ahead to eliminate it on all the sides. I hope you understand. So basically just fold it on top of each other as we were before, then go ahead to eliminate the excess on that point, which is exactly what I'm doing. And voila, our front skirt pattern is ready. So you can see how beautiful this came out looking. This is so pretty. You can see how the point flows evenly, the folded part of your pattern paper. Remember, like I said, that point has to be on fold once transferred into your fabric. And of course, the dart, we're going to be taking it directly off from our fashion fabric. I hope you understand. So with that being said, I will going to keep this aside while we dive right into the drafting of the back pattern. So here is my pattern well laid out for my back pattern, just like we did for the front pattern. We'd go ahead to roll out our starting line at this point, which will equally serve as our waist point line. Please go ahead to mark out your starting line at this point. So remember that the back pattern of your skirt usually comes with a zipper allowance. So at this point, we'd go ahead to impute our zipper allowance at this point. So on your starting line, which happens to be your waist point line, go ahead to impute either 1.5 inches or 1 inch and take it all the way down for your zipper allowance. I hope you understand. So having done that, now go in with your straight ruler and connect all those basic points into each other to form your straight line, just the way I am doing at this point. So having done that, we have our zipper allowance and of course our starting line, which happens to be our waist point. Now place your tape from your waist point line. Remember, like we did earlier on with the front pattern, I told you specifically that I want to attach an high waistband, hence the reason why I didn't subtract 1.5 inches rather, or 2 inches off from my basic skirt measurement for my band. So I want to attach an high waistband, hence the reason why I didn't take off 1.5 inches or 2 inches for my band. I hope you understand. So place your tape from that point, come down by the distance between your client's waist to hip point, which is exactly what I did at this point. The next measurement is the distance between our client's waist to full skirt length point. So having done that, remember we did imputed 2 inches for our client's skirt folding allowance on the front pattern. So for the back pattern, we'd go ahead to impute that same value. Now I'm going to be taking this measurement all the way down here. So this is basically to get the consistency and the accuracy of a straight line. So having done that, go in with your straight ruler and connect this point into each other. But before you do that, please ensure that your connection doesn't exceed the line that demarcates the zipper from the main bodies. I hope you understand. So basically just go ahead to connect all those points into each other to form your basic straight lines. So with that being done, we'd go ahead to label our pattern. So this right here is my zipper allowance point. Over here is my waist point line. This right here is my hip point line. And this right here happens to be my full skirt length. And lastly, this is my skirt folding allowance point, which is this. So having imputed all of our basic point measurements, now the next thing we'd proceed on to do is to impute our circumference measurement. So please kindly take note, all of your measurement input is going to be starting from the line that demarcates the zipper from the main bodies. I hope you understand. So on my waist point line, you're going to divide your waist circumference by 4 and chalk it down at this point. Like I said, ensure it starts from the line that demarcates your zipper from your main bodies. I hope you understand. Now to your hip point, remember we earlier did some mathematical calculations. So I'm going to bring back my pattern. Remember we divided our hip circumference by 2, which left us with the value of 23.5 inches for both our front pattern and the back pattern. So remember on the front pattern we subtracted 1 inch, which gave us 22.5 inches. But for our back pattern, we're still going to maintain that value, which is 23.5 inches. So we're going to further divide that value by 2 again. So remember we earlier divided it by 2, so now we're still going to divide it by 2. And that left us with the value of 11.75. So on my hip point, I'm going to impute 11.75. And at my full skirt length point, please go ahead to subtract 1 inch from whatever you have imputed at your hip point, which mine is 11.75 minus 1 would give me 10.75. On my full skirt length point, I would go ahead to impute that value. And at my skirt folding allowance, I would go ahead to impute that value as well. So before we go ahead to connect all those points into each other to form our basic curve, on the waist point, remember, we're going to be imputing our dart. So your dart is your nipple to nipple divided by 2. So go ahead to divide your bust span into 2. Whatever you have at that point, please go ahead to chalk it down on your waist point. So nipple to nipple divided by 2, mine is 4.5 inches, and I've gone ahead to chalk it down at that point. Place your tape from that point and come down by 5 inches. Remember, this is going to be the length of our dart. 5.5 inches or 5 inches is very much okay. Take that same value down to that point. This is basically to get the consistency of a straight line. Go ahead to reintroduce your straight ruler and go ahead to connect those points into each other to form your basic straight line. So having imputed the length of your darts, your total dart width altogether is 1 inch. Divide that measurement by 2, you're going to be left with the value of 0.5 inch. At your center front, go ahead to impute it, and on your side front, go ahead to impute it this way. So having imputed our 2 basic dart width, now we'll go ahead to connect from that 0.5 inch down to the full length of our dart, which happens to be 5 inch this way. So basically just watch what I'm doing and do go ahead to replicate same. So go ahead to connect this point into each other this way as well. So with this being done, we've successfully imputed our basic dart. We'd have to replace that dart. So we're going to replace that dart, which happens to be 1 inch. Go ahead to measure it and replace it on the side front of your waist point this way. Now going with your curve ruler, connecting from the 1 inch dart replacement on your waist point down to your hip point this way. Please pay attention to the way my slightly curved ruler is being placed and do go ahead to replicate same for yours. Having done that, now place your straight ruler from your hip point down to your full skirt length point. Go ahead to connect those points into each other this way. So with that being done, go in with your straight ruler and extend from your full skirt length down to your folding allowance point this way. So with this being done, please go ahead to smoothen out that point this way. So you have successfully imputed all of your basic point measurements and of course your circumference measurement with all your basic curves. So just like we did with the front pattern, place your tape and come up at that point by 0.5 inch. Having done that, reintroduce your slightly curved ruler and extend that point all the way up to the 0.5 inch that we have at that point. So with that being done, we're going to reintroduce our slightly curved ruler, connecting from that 0.5 inch extension into our dart line this way. So please pay attention to the way my slightly curved ruler is being placed at this point and do go ahead to replicate same for yours. So having done that, now the next thing we'd go ahead to do is we're going to be imputing that 1 inch that we took off earlier on from the measurement of our front half of our front skirt hip circumference. Remember, we subtracted our hip circumference was 47 divided by 2 and we had 23.5 inches for both the front pattern and the back pattern. On the front pattern to be precise, we took out 1 inch. So that 1 inch that we took off from our measurement for the front pattern, on our hip point for our back pattern, would go ahead to replace that measurement, which is that 1 inch, which is exactly what you're seeing at this point. So I'll go in with my straight ruler and I'm going to connect that line all the way in. So having done that, I need you to pay attention to this point. So on your waist point line, if your client has a big bump, go ahead to come in at this point by 0.5 inch. If your client doesn't have a big bump, please go ahead to use the line that demarcates the zipper allowance from the main pattern. With that being done, you're going to go in with your slightly curved ruler to be precise, and you're going to be connecting from that point into your zipper allowance point. But because my client has a big bump, I'm going to connect from the 0.5 inch I came in with on my waist point. I'm going to be connecting it all the way down to the 1 inch extension that we have imputed at the zipper allowance point of our hip point for the 1 inch replacement that we took off from our front pattern. So with that being said, I'm going to go in with my slightly curved ruler all over again, and I'm going to be connecting from my hip point, the 1 inch extension at my hip point, down to my full skirt length point. So you can either do this with your straight ruler or with your curved ruler. Whichever way is very much okay. So I'm going to be doing this with my slightly curved ruler and I'm going to be taking it all the way down. So please go ahead to blend it all the way in. It is very important that you must pay attention to the way my slightly curved ruler is being placed at every point, and do go ahead to replicate same for yours. I hope you understand. So with that being said, we've gone ahead to replace the 1 inch that we took off from our front pattern. I hope you understand. So that was the major reason why we subtracted that 1 inch from our front pattern, so that we'll be able to use that point to contour our butt region. With that being said, we're going to go in with our scissors and we're going to slash through that point, the 1 inch point, into our hip point this way. So please be careful not to cut this off, but make it very as close as possible to your hip point this way on the side. So having slash open that point, reintroduce your fresh sheet of paper, which is this my pattern paper at this point. Go ahead to put it underneath it rather, this way. So ensure that it is well laid at this point, which is exactly what I'm trying to do at this point. Ensure that it is well arranged at this point, which is basically this. So having done that, on the midpoint of that line, you're going to go ahead to draw out a straight line, which will serve as a guide at the midpoint of that line. I hope you understand. So just basically go ahead to mark out your straight line at that point, which is this. So having done that, on the lower part and at the upper part, you're going to be imputing a dart of 0.5 inch on both sides. So on the upper side of the midpoint of that line, come up at that point by 0.5 inch. At the lower region, come down at that point by 0.5 inch as well. So with that being said, you're going to ensure that your pattern paper sits exactly at that 0.5 inch for the upper region. Go in with your masking tape and hold it down this way. Now for the lower region as well, ensure that it sits at the 0.5 inch that you came down with at that point, and go ahead to mask it down as well. I hope you understand. Now for your hip, the side front of your hip point, please go ahead to hold that point down as well. So now, like I said earlier on, ensure that you have that midpoint of that line well highlighted with your straight ruler, which is exactly what you see at this point. So you're going to come up by 0.5 inch and ensure that your pattern sits exactly at that point, which is basically what I did at this point. So I'm going to go in with my water gum and I'm going to be holding it down this way. So basically just watch what I'm doing at this point and do go ahead to replicate same for yours. Go ahead to spread out your water gum, go ahead to return your pattern as it was before, and go ahead to hold it down. So with that being done, you're going to see that the both sides of your pattern is going to be well held down with this. So please go ahead to, basically replicate that same process all over again at this point as well. So I'm going to go ahead to flip back my pattern to how it was before, and I'm going to go ahead to press it down so that the gum can hold it down perfectly on both sides. Having done that, now carefully go ahead to take out your masking tape that you had on that point. Go ahead to hold down that point properly. Go ahead to take out the masking tape on all the sides, which is basically what I'm doing at this point. So this was the more reason why we had that midpoint at that line, so that it will equally serve as a guide, which will enable us to achieve the slash and spread at that point. I hope you understand. So with that being said, we're going to reintroduce our slightly curved ruler, and we're going to blend in those 2 points together, the 0.5 inch at the upper part and the 0.5 inch at the lower part. Go ahead to blend it all the way in this way. So with this being done, like I said earlier on, you could go ahead to use your straight ruler to make your connection all the way down, or you could go ahead to use our slightly curved ruler, which we initially did at that point. Whichever one is very much okay. So you can choose to use your slightly curved ruler or your straight ruler, whichever is your choice is very much okay. So with this being done, you've perfectly imputed for yourself your perfect butt lift contour. As a fashion designer, this butt lift contour technique would certainly give your butt a perfect fit and a proper back skate asymmetric alignment. So this is definitely a must try. So at this point, I am going to go in with my scissors and I'm going to be eliminating all the excesses that we have at every given point. So having eliminated the excesses on my skirt folding allowance, I would go ahead to cut out the side front of my skirt as well, taking it gradually all the way up to this point. So at this point, I won't have to say much, just sit back and watch while I take you through that process. So now to eliminate our butt lift contour at that point, So now you could go ahead, like I said, to use the straight part of your ruler, or you could go ahead to, basically use the slightly curved part. Either way is very much okay. I am going to be taking off from the straight part of my ruler, and I'm going to be taking it gradually all the way down to this point, this way. And voila, our perfectly drafted short skirt with a perfect butt lift contour is ready. So you can see how this point sits very beautifully. The slash and spread method at that point, you can see how that point is definitely going to give your butt a very perfect fit. So this is very beautiful, and this is what you'd certainly want to achieve having followed through the process, and of course you've gotten it right. So with that being said, we'll go ahead to bring back the front pattern of our skirt, and we're going to align it on top of each other to ensure that it synchronizes well on both sides. And you can see how this point aligns very perfectly: the waist region, the hip region, the full skirt length, and of course our skirt folding allowance. And of course you can see our butt lift contour on the back part of our skirt. This is definitely what you'd want to achieve having followed through the process, and of course you've gotten it right. And voila, our short pencil skirt with our perfect butt lift contour is ready. You can see how beautiful our front pattern came out looking. You can see how this point flows all the way down. You can see this point, like I said, is going to be on fold. How that curve sits beautifully and all the way around. Same thing is applicable with our back pattern. This point is sitting very pretty, how it flows all the way down. You can see our well imputed butt lift contour at this point. This is definitely what you'd want to achieve having followed through the process, and of course you've gotten it right. So remember, like I said, we've not added all our basic allowances. So for all your basic allowances, you're going to be adding 2 inches at that point, 0.5 inch at this point. Remember, this point is on fold. For your skirt folding allowance, we have already imputed 2 inches. So there's definitely no need for adding a folding allowance at that point. Now for the back pattern, whatever you use as your side seam allowance for your front, you'd go ahead to impute that same value for your back pattern. At this point, 0.5 inch for the full skirt allowance, folding allowance rather, we've already imputed our 2 inches. So there is definitely no reason for imputing another sewing allowance at that point. So on your butt lift contour, you're going to be imputing your zipper allowance following the curves at that point. So these are all the basic allowances that you're going to be imputing directly on your fashion fabric. So with that being said, we've come to the end of our tutorial. Up next on our channel is going to be the sewing part of this beautiful short pencil skirt with a butt lift contour. Thank you, and I'm going to be seeing you on my next video. Bye!